Well, Oxana Pizzick is a global health expert at University College London, and she joins us now. Good to have you with us. It was laid out there in that report. The scale of the infection in the US is absolutely terrifying. It took 2 weeks to go from 8 million infections to 9 million infections. And I just want to also say, those stats, that means there's one person being infected every second and one person dying every 2 minutes in the US. What do you make of this?
This is an exponential growth, and this
Yeah.
means that we are heading towards, particularly in the US, the worst part of the pandemic is ahead. We are going to see an incredibly steep rise. This will continue. And the problem with that is once you start to get into this rate of growth at this speed, it means that the restrictions that need to come in have to be harder. It gives you less flexibility in the types of interventions you might have to use. And geographically, what we saw back in March was that there were some hot zones in areas where that were the epicenters of the outbreak in the US. But what we're seeing now is that it's reached nearly every part of the US. And so, although it doesn't match what was going on at the beginning, if we just take New York as an example, that's the direction it's going to head en masse if we aren't able to reverse the current rate of growth.
And then also you heard in that piece the president saying that doctors and hospitals are actually inflating the COVID numbers for financial gain. What do you think when you hear that?
I think it's incredibly, first of all, inaccurate and also disrespectful to the role that our healthcare workers, especially those that have died in the line of duty at the beginning of the outbreak when there wasn't sufficient PPE, to put it as though this was some kind of financial gain when they are taking enormous risks every day. That it's entirely misleading, and that has, I suppose, a political underpinning reason. But equally, it's misinformation, and this has been one of the most difficult aspects of the entire pandemic, because that type of information is then what sticks. It helps to propagate conspiracy theories and resistance against public health measures that every single scientific body, including the WHO, the CDC, are backing, and all of the top experts. So again, it's capitalizing on some fringe views and trying to push them into the mainstream.
You're there in the UK. Infections also not doing so well there. They've surpassed the government's worst case scenarios. And then we're hearing these reports of a possible national lockdown coming next week. Do you think that's too little too late?
Well, Europe has once again become the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. And what we're seeing here in the UK is that the areas that are able to slow some of the spread have had circuit breakers and other types of interventions. But in some ways, we do see that it is going to be, without that September 21st recommendation for a larger amount of areas to go into the circuit breaker, that we're now heading into about in 17 to 20 days. Hospital at their current rate of doubling, we will see the same hospitalization rates as we did in the peak in April. So that's very concerning. And it means that we are, again, pushing ourselves into a boundary where we have to take more severe measures for a longer period of time that then has more consequences, not just on health, but the wider economy. We're going to have to do it for longer. Instead of 2 weeks, it might be something like in France, where we're seeing it for a month or longer period. So really the key to action here is to ensure that we are on top of the current rate. The R value is estimated to be between 1.2 to 1.6 right now. We need to get it down to 5,000 cases per day to really be able to operate with more flexibility. And again, in the UK, we have a test and trace system that urgently needs to be reformed. And that again means that we can't have a more targeted or sophisticated approach. We're going to have more blunt blanket restrictions. As you say, too little, too late.
Global health expert there, Oxana Pizzick in London. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. So steadily rising coronavirus numbers in the UK have authorities really, as we've been saying now, considering a lockdown. So according to the British paper, I want to talk more about this, The Times, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson is debating the move and could make that call next week. Now, Downing Street confirms a news conference on Monday, but says the report is speculation. But British scientists are warning that numbers are headed in the complete wrong direction. You just heard Oxana say, and there are fears that the hospital system could be completely overwhelmed. Well, here's Selma Abdulaziz with more on all of that from London. Selma, just give us a sense on this reporting that there could be this national lockdown. What do you make of that?
Robin, let's start with these numbers that you just mentioned. According to the BBC, and again, these are local media reports, we don't have them confirmed, the government is looking at projections of 4,000 deaths a day if nothing is done about the rising coronavirus cases. So they are looking at some really stark, terrible figures. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson is making a decision right now, and a decision that he said he absolutely would not want to make, and that is a nationwide lockdown. He's become increasingly isolated in his strategy, which is a regional approach, a tiered regional approach where he has carved up the country geographically, given each area one of 3 levels, and based on the rate of infection and the number of coronavirus cases, each part of the country has had a different level of restriction. And he has faced an absolute uprising over this strategy from regional leaders. For example, the city of Manchester, for 10 days, the mayor refused to put these stricter measures in place. He's faced opposition from the scientific advisors, who have for weeks said that a short, sharp, but complete nationwide shutdown is needed. He's faced opposition from business leaders who've said that a nationwide lockdown provides more financial support and better certainty for businesses. He's faced opposition from the Labour Party, the opposition Labour Party. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been this entire time steadfast in his approach. He has been resolute that a nationwide lockdown is not needed. So the question will be, why now, Robin? If this takes place, he'll need to explain it to the country.
And what does the country think about all of this? What are folks saying?
Well, Robin, he is going to face a great deal of frustration, to be honest, because for weeks, people have been asking questions. These tiered restrictions really get people into the minutiae. Essentially, pubs and bars have to shut down if they don't serve substantial meals. So that's been part of the questioning and part of the consideration. So what is a substantial meal? Can I keep my business open if I serve a sandwich, or is it a sandwich and crisps? And while they've been in this minutiae, the number of coronavirus cases has risen, the infection rate has risen. You've had this outburst from regional leaders who don't want to impose these restrictions. And of course, we have to think here about the death rate. This means that the NHS could potentially be overwhelmed. So for these medical workers to face this nightmare once more, potentially even worse than the first time, and coming up on Christmas, that's a very difficult pill to swallow, Robin, and he's going to need to explain it.
Yeah, he sure is. Selma Abdulaziz is there in London. Thank you very much. So the US election is